The golden chandeliers of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant cast a warm, almost deceptive glow over the polished mahogany table, stretching the length of the room like a river of wealth and privilege. Amara Johnson sat at its far end, her back straight, her hands folded delicately in her lap, her understated black dress whispering sophistication without shouting it. She was 28, brilliant, calm, and composed, Stanford and Harvard degrees hidden beneath the quiet elegance of her presence. Across the table, the Wellington family gleamed like polished trophies, pearls and diamonds catching the light with every subtle movement, their laughter hollow but precise, rehearsed, as though they were performing for an audience that only they could see. Margaret Wellington, the matriarchal aunt with eyes sharp enough to cut glass, leaned toward her sister-in-law, voice sweet yet dripping with venom. "That girl," she said, just loud enough for the table to catch every word, "doesn't even seem to know how to hold a fork properly. My poor David, what a disgrace to our family line." The words landed in the air like a hammer striking crystal. Amara's gaze never wavered from her plate, cutting a piece of salmon with deliberate precision, but beneath the calm, her mind was a storm. She catalogued every gesture, every intonation, every subtle weapon veiled as concern. Christine, the youngest Wellington cousin, snickered, a sharp, cruel sound that made the skin along Amara's arms prick with the recognition of danger. "Oh, and I bet her degrees are just diversity scholarships, right? How cute." The laughter of privilege rolled through the air, suffocating, thick enough to taste. David, Amara's fiancé of 2 years, shifted uncomfortably in his chair, tugging at his tie as though it could strangle the tension into submission. His eyes flickered toward Amara, a silent plea, but his mouth only managed a weak, "Christine, please." Amara's lips curved slightly, not in amusement, but in the tiniest hint of control. She did not tremble. She did not retaliate. She had learned early in life that power often masquerades as civility, and that patience is a weapon sharper than any sword. She let the family's contempt wash over her, storing each insult like carefully pressed flowers in the album of her memory. Margaret's pearls glinted as she poured herself another glass of wine, savoring the imagined victory. "Girls like that always have a goal, don't they, Richard?" she said, casting a glance at the patriarch. Richard Wellington, the man who had built a fortune from inherited wealth and unquestioned privilege, studied Amara with the cold gaze of a man evaluating an asset, not a human being. "Yes, a goal," Amara said softly, voice like silk but carrying a steel edge that could cut through marble. "And what might that be?" Her question hung in the air, challenging the invisible hierarchy, daring them to underestimate her further. A hush fell across the table. Waiters paused mid-step, knives and napkins held, as if time itself had decided to observe the moment. David's hand fidgeted with the engagement ring on his finger, the hesitation a dagger to Amara's trust. The man she had loved, the man who had promised protection and respect, was now paralyzed between family loyalty and justice. She understood in that instant. The family's venom had already seeped into his heart. But rather than breaking, she leaned forward slightly, maintaining the serene composure that had carried her through countless boardrooms, countless moments of subtle sexism and racism that had trained her mind to read people like open books. Margaret's voice, sweet but poisoned, rose again. "Oh dear, you really must understand our world. Perhaps other professional opportunities will suit you better." Amara set down her fork, the clink of metal against porcelain marking the end of polite patience and the beginning of quiet, simmering awareness. She did not speak immediately. She did not need to. The eyes of the Wellingtons lingered on her as if expecting a reaction, but what they received was a calm, unshakable presence, the kind that only those who have endured storms they cannot yet reveal carry. In that room of glittering wealth and inherited arrogance, the seeds of humiliation had been sown, but in the same instant a quiet fire was lit within Amara Johnson, one that would grow beyond their expectations. Every laugh, every whisper, every dismissive glance was a brick in the foundation of a reckoning they could not yet imagine. And in her eyes, sharp and unyielding, there was a promise. This was far from over. The city lights of Manhattan glimmered against the night sky, but inside Amara's apartment, the glow came from the soft luminescence of her laptop screens, each displaying a meticulously organized array of documents, emails, and spreadsheets. The humiliation of the evening had settled into her bones, but it did not linger as despair. It became fuel. The subtle cruelty of Margaret's whispers, Christine's mocking laughter, the patriarch's calculating stare, every insult, every veiled threat had been cataloged, analyzed, and transformed into actionable intelligence. She poured herself a cup of tea, the the steam curling like a delicate wisp of patience, and let herself breathe for a moment. But the calm was only skin deep. Behind it, a mind worked with relentless precision. Every detail of the Wellington family's interactions, both public and private, was already logged in her mental ledger. The patterns of prejudice, the arrogance born of unchecked wealth, the hubris that comes from believing oneself untouchable. David's quiet cowardice gnawed at her, but it was only another confirmation of the power imbalance she had always known existed in their relationship. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, and the apartment filled with the soft clatter of keys as she began connecting the dots. Over the past 2 years, she had been not only an employee of Wellington and Associates, but also an observer, a silent witness to a world of privilege corrupting itself. Small discrepancies in accounts, unexplained transfers, offhand remarks in meetings, all of it painted a picture that would shock anyone unprepared to see the rot beneath the surface of wealth. Her education had given her the tools to read the numbers, to see patterns where others only saw luxury, and her experience in financial crimes auditing had trained her to look beyond the facade. A message blinked on her phone from David, the text innocuous on its surface, but heavy with guilt. "Can we talk tomorrow? Maybe find a solution that works for everyone. My family is concerned." She smiled faintly, a gesture both private and controlled, and replied simply, "Sure, let's talk." The calmness in her response was a mask, one she wore effortlessly. What David could not comprehend was that she was no longer the passive partner at a family dinner. She was a strategist, gathering every piece of evidence, every whisper, every photograph of discrimination and professional sabotage. The first files she opened were simple, almost banal in appearance. Spreadsheets of client accounts, internal memos, emails outlining investment decisions. But as she scrolled, the irregularities leapt off the screen. Funds had been moved into offshore accounts, client money had been diverted for high-risk personal ventures, and documents had been forged to conceal losses. Each discovery was another layer of betrayal, not just of her personally, but of every family and individual who had trusted the Wellingtons with their livelihood. Hours passed like minutes. Amara's apartment, usually a sanctuary of minimalism and quiet, became a war room. She contacted discreet allies. Journalists, former colleagues, even lawyers she knew, had been quietly frustrated by Wellington's arrogance and manipulation. Marcus Rivera, an investigative reporter with a reputation for exposing high-profile financial scandals, agreed to meet her the next morning. Through him, she could amplify the truth without putting herself at unnecessary risk. And as the night deepened, Amara allowed herself a fleeting, private acknowledgement. The family who had underestimated her, who had belittled her heritage and intellect, had done exactly what she needed them to do. Their arrogance had made them predictable, their prejudice had made them vulnerable, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel a surge of quiet satisfaction, the beginnings of a plan forming with crystal clarity. Tomorrow she would step further into the intricate web of justice she was weaving, not out of vengeance but out of the uncompromising principle that those who build empires on the exploitation and humiliation of others will inevitably fall when confronted by someone they considered invisible. And Amara Johnson, calm and poised, brilliant and relentless, was no longer invisible. Morning arrived over Manhattan with a muted chill that seeped through the city streets, brushing against the glass towers that reflected the first tentative sunlight. Amara sat in a quiet Lower East Side cafe, a discreet table near the back where her laptop hummed softly, its screen illuminating the meticulous folders of evidence she had prepared over the past 2 years. Every bank statement, every email, every note of condescension or prejudice from the Wellington family had been cataloged with surgical precision. Today, those files would begin to speak. Marcus Rivera arrived punctually, his presence understated but commanding, a man of 42 with sharp eyes and the weary gravity of someone who had fought many battles against entrenched power. He slid into the booth across from her, coffee in hand. "You said you had information about the Wellingtons," he began, his tone cautious but tinged with curiosity. Amara placed a discreet folder on the table. Her hands were calm, her composure perfect, but inside, the satisfaction she felt was barely contained. "I do," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "Everything they've done, every illegal maneuver, every act of professional sabotage, they did in plain sight, thinking no one would notice." Marcus flipped through the first few documents, his eyes widening as the full scope revealed itself. Bank statements with transfers to offshore accounts, shell companies hidden behind layers of corporate opacity, forged documents, fraudulent contracts. Each page was a small hammer striking against the illusion of Wellington infallibility. This is incredible," he muttered, pausing on a transcribed recording. Richard Wellington's voice rang out from the device, a laugh that dripped with arrogance. Those old folks will never find out. They trust us because we're Wellington. Tradition speaks louder than competence. Amara's lips curved into a slight smile, invisible to anyone outside the booth. They thought I was just office decoration, she said quietly. The token. The black employee who proves they aren't racist. They never considered I might actually see, understand, and record everything. Marcus leaned back, absorbing the weight of her words. You risked everything for this, he said. I didn't risk, Amara corrected, her eyes cold yet controlled. I prepared. And now I ensure accountability. While the cafe buzzed with the morning rush, back in the Wellington mansion, panic had already begun to take root. Christine had called an emergency family meeting, gathering uncles, cousins, and a network of allies who thrive. Dion privilege. Richard paced the ornate living room like a caged lion. We need to neutralize her before she causes any more trouble, he barked, voice trembling with both anger and fear. Margaret, seated regally in her velvet armchair, smiled with poisonous calm. A few discreet calls, she said, and she'll learn just how small New York can be for someone who doesn't know her place. David hovered in the corner, guilt and cowardice warring in his posture. He had spent the night replaying Amara's calm defiance, her quiet intelligence, and for the first time, the magnitude of his family's arrogance and racism struck him with clarity. Amara, meanwhile, was several blocks away, organizing the first phase of her strategy. Her phone buzzed repeatedly, messages from colleagues confirming the Wellingtons' behind-the-scenes attempts to sabotage her professionally. Each call, each effort was being monitored by a discreet network she had cultivated, a coalition of black professionals, former colleagues, and allies in positions of influence who had quietly watched, listened, and recorded every move. By late morning, Rebecca Chun, a skilled Asian-American corporate lawyer and longtime ally, had contacted her. They're doing exactly what we expected, Rebecca said, voice sharp with a mix of indignation and strategic satisfaction. Every attempt to discredit you is documented, every insult, every interference. You have a record for moral damages and systematic persecution. Amara allowed herself a brief private smile. They truly believed she was powerless. They didn't realize that every act of cruelty, every subtle attempt to belittle her, had built the foundation of the storm she was now ready to unleash. As the city pulsed around her, she typed a single message to David. Sure, let's meet. I have some things to show you and your family. The stage was set. The Wellingtons' arrogance, their blind confidence in inherited power, was about to meet at the calm, calculated force of someone they had underestimated for far too long. And for Amara Johnson, the next move was more than a step toward justice. It was the first domino in a collapse they would never see coming. The Wellington family gathered in their Manhattan office that Thursday afternoon, each member carrying a fragile confidence that masked mounting unease. Margaret's pearls clicked as she paced, each step a rehearsed gesture of control. Richard leaned against his mahogany desk, forcing an air of authority, while Christine scrolled through her phone with a practiced nonchalance, her manicured nails glinting under the overhead lights. David stood off to the side, adjusting his tie for the fifth time, attempting to conjure composure, though his eyes betrayed an inner tremor that only Amara had ever learned to read. Amara arrived punctually as always, her presence understated yet commanding. She wore a sharply tailored business suit, simple, elegant, and impeccable. Her calm aura contrasted sharply with the tension in the room, as though she carried an invisible weight that the Wellingtons couldn't begin to comprehend. The briefcase in her hand was discreet, unassuming, but inside it contained the culmination of 2 years of meticulous observation, documentation, and preparation. Evidence that could dismantle a dynasty built on arrogance and deceit. Richard offered a stiff smile. Amara, thank you for coming. We appreciate your willingness to resolve the situation in a civilized manner. Difficult? Amara repeated, her voice perfectly even. Interesting choice of words. Her dark eyes swept over the family, calm but razor-sharp, measuring the fear barely concealed behind their practiced masks. David cleared his throat. We have prepared a generous offer, he began nervously, avoiding her gaze. $50,000 plus a letter of recommendation. In exchange for a confidentiality agreement. Margaret's smile was sweet but venomous. It's more than fair considering the circumstances. You can start over somewhere else, far from complications. Amara placed her briefcase on the desk and opened it carefully. From inside, she withdrew a tablet, laying it flat so the screen faced them. Before I respond, I'd like to show you a few things I discovered during my 2 years with Wellington and Associates. Christine snorted softly, rolling her eyes. Please, let's not make a scene. You've lost. Accept it with dignity. Lost? Amara murmured, activating the tablet. The first image displayed a bank statement showing a $15 million transfer from the company's employee retirement account to an offshore account registered under Richard Wellington's name. Richard's carefully cultivated composure shattered instantly. Where did you get this? He stammered, his face flushing a deep, angry red. Amara's finger swiped across the screen, revealing a cascade of evidence: forged contracts, fraudulent transfers, internal emails discussing how to conceal losses, and recordings of Richard boasting about using client funds for personal risk ventures. Each piece of evidence landed like a hammer on the fragile illusion of their invulnerability. Margaret's voice trembled despite her attempt at control. This is theft of confidential information. Amara's voice, soft yet authoritative, cut through their panic. I am documenting crimes you committed in plain sight every day, underestimating me at every turn, every insult, every attempt to sabotage me professionally. It's all here. David leaned forward, sweating. Amara, be reasonable. We can talk about this. Talk? Amara interrupted, tapping the tablet. A recording of Richard laughing echoed through the office. Those old folks will never find out. They trust us because we're Wellington. Tradition speaks louder than competence. Christine paled, her phone trembling in her hand. You recorded us? I recorded everything, Amara said calmly, locking eyes with each family member, including your racist comments, your strategies to undermine me, and your attempts to ruin me professionally. Everything. And now, a formal complaint has been filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission, case number WF 2024-847, systematic fraud and misappropriation of Wellington and Associates funds. Silence descended like a physical weight. Margaret collapsed into her chair, Richard's knees buckled, and Christine's Instagram world of carefully curated perfection shattered into 1,000 irretrievable pieces. Amara stood, her presence unwavering, and her voice carried a final surgical edge. You were a respected family until Monday. You destroyed your own reputation with your arrogance, your crimes, and your prejudice. Today, the world sees exactly who you are. David's face turned ashen, realizing too late the magnitude of what had been lost: the fortune, the family name, and the woman he had failed to protect. Through the glass office doors, 2 federal agents entered, flanking Marcus Rivera, their presence a silent confirmation that Amara's carefully orchestrated operation was no longer a threat on paper, it was reality. The Wellingtons, steeped in generations of unchallenged privilege, were finally forced to confront the consequences of their own actions. The moment the office doors swung open, the tension that had thickened over 2 hours shifted into something heavier, almost tangible. Amara's composure never wavered, but the Wellingtons could feel the air crackling, as if some invisible wire had been tripped. 2 figures in plain suits flanked Marcus Rivera, the investigative journalist who had been her discreet ally all these months. One of the agents, an African-American woman with a confident stride and eyes that had seen the worst of white-collar deceit, paused at the threshold and offered a subtle, almost imperceptible nod to Amara. Amara Johnson, the agent said, extending her hand. Her voice was calm, professional, carrying a weight that silenced every whispered thought in the room. Or should I say, Special Agent Johnson of the FBI Financial Crimes Division? The room went still. David froze mid-step, his hand halfway to his face, and Margaret clutched her pearls as though they were talismans of protection. Richard's lips parted in disbelief, but no sound came out. Christine's phone slipped from her manicured fingers, clattering onto the polished floor, the screen reflecting the realization she had already feared. The woman they had mocked, the black employee they had dismissed as office decoration, had been the instrument of justice all along. David started, his voice cracking. You're with the FBI? Yes, Amara replied evenly, her calm demeanor now layered with authority. I was assigned to this operation 2 years ago, Operation Wellington, and your arrogance, your prejudice, and your illegal actions made my job remarkably straightforward. Margaret's hands shook violently. This is a setup. Entrapment. Entrapment? Amara's voice was steady, sharp. No, Margaret. You and your family made the decisions. Every transfer, every fraudulent contract, every attempt to humiliate and sabotage. Age me professionally, all documented, all voluntary. You see, the law does not protect ignorance or prejudice. It protects accountability. Richard staggered backward, his face drained of color. David, think of your family. Think of the legacy. Amara turned her gaze toward David, her eyes holding the weight of betrayal and clarity. Think of me, David. You promised to stand by me, yet you chose family loyalty over justice, over decency, over recognizing right from wrong. True loyalty does not condone prejudice. Christine's voice, fragile and panicked, barely reached a whisper. Our reputation, all of this, it can't be true. Is it? Marcus asked, holding up his recorder. Because everything you said and did is already on tape. Every call, every meeting, every attempt to hide your crimes, it's all here, and the story goes live tomorrow. Amara's fingers hovered over her tablet. With a swipe, she revealed emails to the New York Herald, approved for publication, detailing the fraudulent empire the Wellingtons had built, their offshore accounts, their client manipulations, and the systemic racism they had perpetuated. Social media notifications erupted instantly, trending hashtags, screenshots, and threads exposing their misdeeds. The room descended into chaos. Margaret crumpled in her chair, sobbing. Christine's phone flashed with notifications she could no longer control, each one a digital verdict against her shallow arrogance. Richard's knees buckled as the weight of decades of unchallenged impunity crashed down upon him. Amara stood like the eye of the storm, serene, poised, and utterly untouchable. You underestimated me, she said softly, each word deliberate. You assumed your privilege made you untouchable. Today, the world sees exactly who you are, and justice, real, unflinching justice, is served. The agents moved forward, preparing to escort the families. Lie and secure their offices. David, still rooted in disbelief, could only watch as the woman he had dismissed and humiliated became the architect of his family's undoing. For 2 years, he had failed to see her brilliance, her courage, and her unwavering moral compass. Now, he was forced to confront the cost of that failure. Amara gathered her briefcase, her tablet, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that her carefully executed plan had worked. Outside, the press and the public were waiting. Inside, the Wellingtons had realized, perhaps too late, that privilege is no shield against truth, and prejudice no armor against justice. The morning sunlight streamed through the skyscraper windows, but inside the Wellington offices, it felt as if night had fallen. Reporters, cameras, and drones crowded the streets below, capturing every moment of a scandal that had shaken Manhattan's elite. Inside, Amara moved with quiet precision, her composure untouched by the chaos she had orchestrated. The air smelled faintly of expensive cologne and fear, the kind only privilege knows when it finally realizes it has limits. Margaret sat slumped in a velvet armchair, her pearl necklace tangled in trembling fingers. Every call she had made, every favor she had attempted to wield, had been rendered useless. Her daughter, Christine, hovered near the desk, frantically swiping at her phone, trying to delete Instagram posts and direct messages, only to realize that the internet, like truth, preserves what power cannot erase. Richard, usually a mountain of unshakable pride, now looked like a man who had aged decades in a single night. His empire, built on manipulation, racial prejudice, and financial deception, was unraveling, and the realization weighed on him like lead. David, pale and guilt-stricken, finally confronted Amara. His usual charm was gone, replaced by the raw vulnerability of someone forced to face the consequences of his choices. Amara, I didn't know. I couldn't. He stammered, his eyes flicking nervously to the cameras filming the spectacle outside. Amara's gaze met his, steady and unwavering. You had every opportunity to defend me, David, every single one. Instead, you let fear and family loyalty dictate your actions. True loyalty, true love does not condone prejudice. You chose them over justice, over decency, over me. Her voice, calm yet resonant, left no room for denial. Outside, the crowd had grown into a sea of journalists, onlookers, and social media live streamers. Screens lit up across New York City broadcasting the story. Banking dynasty crumbles, Wellington family exposed for million-dollar fraud. The hashtags trended worldwide, and within hours, Amara's meticulous evidence had become a blueprint for understanding the depth of corruption that money and tradition could hide. As federal agents began to seize documents and secure offices, Amara walked past the family who had underestimated her. Every step was deliberate, dignified, and calculated. She paused briefly at Margaret, who looked up with teary, desperate eyes. Do you understand now? Amara asked softly. Privilege does not make you untouchable. Racism does not make you superior. And arrogance makes you predictable. The agents moved to escort Richard and Christine out, and Amara allowed herself a small, controlled smile. There was no gloating in her expression, only the quiet satisfaction of justice executed flawlessly. David lingered behind, shame settling like a physical weight on his shoulders. He had watched her strength, her intellect, and her unwavering moral compass outshine the very family he had once placed above her. Hours later, in the calmer aftermath, Amara sat in her apartment, her laptop open, reviewing the media coverage and federal reports. Each headline, each broadcast, each social media post validated the long months of patience, strategy, and emotional endurance she had invested. She had turned humiliation into power, prejudice into exposure, and betrayal into vindication. Her phone buzzed, a message from the FBI confirming that her promotion to regional director would be effective immediately. Operation Wellington would become a case study, a template for investigating elite crimes, and Amara's name would be etched into its history. She leaned back, eyes reflecting the city skyline, and allowed herself the smallest exhale of relief. Justice was no longer an abstract concept. It had a face, and it had a plan. In the streets below, the Wellingtons' once pristine reputation lay in ruins. Former colleagues whispered, journalists speculated, and social media chronicled every misstep. But inside, Amara had already begun looking forward, toward the next case, the next injustice, the next opportunity to prove that integrity, intelligence, and determination are the most formidable weapons of all. Her journey from a quietly underestimated employee to the orchestrator of one of New York's most sensational exposures was complete. The Wellingtons had learned far too late that underestimating someone based on race or class is not merely a mistake, it is a catastrophe waiting to unfold. And Amara, serene and unwavering, had been the architect of that revelation. The city hummed quietly beneath the glow of early evening, a stark contrast to the storm that had consumed the Wellington family. By now, Manhattan had absorbed the shockwaves of the scandal. News anchors recounted every misappropriated dollar. Social media was ablaze with commentary, and financial analysts debated how a dynasty so steeped in power and tradition could collapse so completely. But inside her apartment, Amara Johnson sat in silence, a rare moment of calm settling over her like a warm cloak. She allowed herself to feel it, the culminate. Buy-in of months, years even, of meticulous planning, restraint, and resilience. Her reflection in the window framed the city lights, but she was no longer just a figure caught between two worlds. She had become a force, a woman whose intellect and integrity could dismantle the carefully constructed facades of wealth and entitlement. Her eyes lingered on the tablet that had changed the course of the Wellington Empire, now resting closed on the polished surface of her desk. It was a tool of justice, but also a symbol of her patient strength. She had never let anger dictate her actions. She had let strategy do the work. The FBI call confirming her promotion to regional director still echoed in her mind. It was more than a title. It was a recognition of her mastery over systems, human behavior, and the hidden corridors of power. She would now lead investigations targeting those who believed their pedigree and privilege placed them above the law. Amara's career, once underestimated and trivialized by her fiancé and his family, had become a platform for truth. Her thoughts drifted to the Wellingtons. Margaret was confined to a modest apartment in Queens, her former grandeur reduced to memories. Christine, stripped of influencer contracts and social status, now navigated a humbler existence. Richard, the patriarch whose arrogance had been legendary, was serving time in federal prison, grappling with the consequences of choices made under the illusion of invincibility. And David, once the man she had trusted implicitly, had retreated into obscurity, his own failings a permanent stain on a life that had once promised comfort and love. Amara did not relish their suffering. She simply acknowledged that justice had its own rhythm, one that finally synchronized with morality. The lesson was clear, not just for the Wellingtons, but for every observer of the spectacle. Superiority. It's not inherited, it is earned. Privilege is no shield against accountability. And prejudice, no matter how subtle or veiled in family concern, can be dismantled with patience, intellect, and courage. Amara's journey had been a testament to this truth. She had weathered humiliation with grace, faced betrayal with discernment, and turned systemic oppression into a mechanism for exposing corruption. As she prepared for the next chapter of her career, Amara reflected on the personal growth that accompanied her professional triumph. She had learned the value of patience, the weight of silence before action, and the power of observation in a world that constantly underestimated her. Her strength was no longer invisible. It radiated through her decisions, her presence, and the legacy she was creating. The story of Amara Johnson and the Wellingtons became more than a scandal. It became a case study, a parable of resilience against systemic injustice, a blueprint for turning humiliation into empowerment. She would continue to mentor, investigate, and enforce justice, transforming every obstacle into a lesson for those who dared to doubt her. In the quiet of her apartment, she allowed herself a small, private smile. The storm had passed, leaving a clarity few could ever attain. The Wellingtons had believed they were untouchable. She had shown them, and the world, that intelligence, integrity, and courage could dismantle even the tallest towers of entitlement. And as she gazed at the city skyline, Amara knew this was only the beginning. Her legacy was no longer about surviving. It was about shaping the very system that had once sought to crush her.